Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we are setting the stage for what is, honestly, basically a cinematic historical thriller. We're looking at this single, incredibly tense event that literally brought the world to the brink. It fundamentally shifted global power dynamics and marked the definitive end of European colonial dominance, the whole shebang. We are, of course, talking about the Suez Crisis of 1956.
It's a pretty massive claim, right? I mean, how exactly did a 100-mile waterway in the Egyptian desert manage to dismantle a global empire? Well, stick with me, because by the time we finish today, I promise to reveal exactly how this short, intense conflict over a canal completely rewrote the rulebook of the Cold War and showed the world who the new superpowers truly were.
Section 1, the Canal and the Cold War. Let's dive right into this.
To really understand this global powder keg, we have to look at the canal itself. Completed back in 1869, this 100-mile stretch of water totally changed the game for global shipping. It gave ships the absolute shortest ocean link between the Mediterranean Sea and the Indian Ocean. And here's a quick, kind of wild fact for you. The French sculptor who originally designed the canal's entrance pitched this colossal statue of a robed woman holding a torch to stand guard over it. But Egypt couldn't afford it, so he repurposed the design and eventually gifted it to New York as the Statue of Liberty. Crazy, right? But anyway, back in Egypt, while the canal was physically located on sovereign Egyptian territory, there was this massive catch. It was financially and operationally controlled by a company that was dominated by British and French interests. So think about it. You have this absolutely vital piece of Egyptian geography, but it's controlled by European powers. That is a total recipe for tension.
And this number right here tells you exactly why that tension mattered so much to the West. 1,200,000. That is the number of barrels of oil shipped by tanker through the Suez Canal every single day to Western Europe in the 1950s. To put that into perspective, the canal was literally the economic jugular vein of Britain and France. Without that daily flow of petroleum, their economies would simply grind to a halt.
So the board is set, right? And we've got two very different geopolitical visions going head-to-head. On one side, you have the Western powers, mostly the US and Britain. They desperately wanted to maintain stability and were trying to form a NATO-style defense organization in the Middle East, basically to block Soviet influence. But then, on the other side, you have Gamal Abdel Nasser, the incredibly charismatic president of Egypt. Nasser's vision was totally different. He wanted an independent, Egyptian-dominated Arab League, completely free of that old European colonial influence, and he absolutely wasn't afraid to play the US and the Soviets against each other to get what he wanted.
Section 2. Seizing the Suez. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the name. Ferdinand de Lesseps. He was the original French builder of the canal, but jump forward to July 1956 and his name suddenly became a trigger. See, after the US and Britain pulled their promised funding for Egypt's massive Aswan High Dam project, largely because Nasser was buying arms from the Soviet bloc, Nasser gave this fiery public speech in Alexandria, and during that speech he deliberately dropped the name Ferdinand de Lesseps. Actually, scratch that. It wasn't just dropping a name. This wasn't a history lesson. It was a highly classified secret code word. The literal second he said it on live radio, Egyptian military forces moved in and seized total control of the Suez Canal.
So let's break down the immediate cause and effect here, because it's crucial. Egypt's plan was straightforward. They were just going to use the massive toll revenues from the newly nationalized canal to build their Aswan High Dam themselves. Simple enough, right? But this move directly provoked absolute panic over in London and Paris. The British and French were absolutely terrified that Nasser would close the canal and cut off those 1.2 million barrels of oil. To them, it felt like he was effectively holding Western Europe hostage.
Moving right along to Section 3, the secret invasion.
Behind closed doors, Britain, France, and Israel concocted this massive secret military intervention. And get this, they kept this plot entirely hidden from their own allies. Even the United States, no way were they sharing this. The Anglo-French portion was known as Operation Revise, and it was essentially a two-step plan. Step 1, gain total air supremacy over Egypt. Step 2, launch a 10-day aero-psychological bombing campaign. The whole goal was to shatter the Egyptian economy and force Nasser out of power. It really was this old-school imperial reflex, right? Just this ingrained belief that they could simply use overwhelming force to dictate terms.
And the plan went into motion with brutal speed. Here's exactly how the tripartite attack unfolded. On October 29th, Israel, acting on that secret agreement, invaded the Sinai Peninsula with 10 brigades, rapidly pushing toward the canal. Now, this gave Britain and France their perfectly pre-planned excuse to step in and demand a ceasefire, one that they knew for a fact Egypt would reject. When Egypt inevitably refused, the British and French launched their air campaign. By November 5th, their paratroopers and Marines were landing right at Port Said.
But look at the reality on the ground here in Port Said. It was devastating. While the military planners were drawing these neat little lines on maps back in London and Paris, the invasion escalated into a brutal, chaotic reality for the civilians and soldiers actually there. The city was heavily damaged, and honestly, the Egyptian resistance was much, much fiercer than the invaders had ever anticipated.
Section 4. Superpowers force a halt.
And this brilliantly illustrates the shocking international backlash that followed. It literally united the globe's biggest rivals. Look at this. You have the United States, the Soviet Union, and the United Nations, all completely aligned against Britain, France, and Israel. The US, led by President Eisenhower, was absolutely furious at the invasion, especially since they'd been kept in the dark by their closest allies. He feared it was going to drive the entire Arab world straight into the arms of the Soviets. The Soviets, meanwhile, were threatening to intervene directly to support Egypt. So you have the two great Cold War rivals actually agreeing on something for once. The old European empires had massively overstepped, and this invasion had to stop immediately.
The economic and political pressure from the United States was so immense that the British and French economies actually began to buckle within just days. Facing financial ruin and total global condemnation, the invaders were deeply humiliated. They were forced into a rapid withdrawal. By December 22, 1956, British and French troops were entirely evacuated by UN mandate. Israeli forces would eventually follow suit and withdraw a few months later by March 1957.
Section 5. The Global Aftermath. Impartially looking at the fallout here, a few massive shifts occurred. First, Gamal Abdel Nasser emerged as an absolute hero of Arab nationalism. He stood up to the colonial empires, and he kept the canal. Second, the United Nations established its very first emergency policing force, the UNF, to patrol the border. This actually earned Canadian diplomat Lester B. Pearson a Nobel Peace Prize for the idea. And third, tragically, analysts believe the distraction of the Suez Crisis emboldened the Soviet Union to brutally crush the Hungarian Revolution, which was happening at the exact same time, knowing full well the West was divided.
By November 1956, as you can see here, British soldiers were reduced to supervising crowds and distributing food in a battered Port Said. Now, while Israel did achieve its goal of regaining shipping rights in the Straits of Tiran, scenes exactly like this one marked the definitive, final loss of British and French imperial influence in the Middle East. It was over. They could no longer dictate global affairs through military might. The torch had been forcibly passed.
Section 6. Timeline of the crisis. Let's see how this all built up.
In just a few short years, the escalation is wild. We go from a domestic revolution in Egypt in 1952 to a geopolitical shockwave with the Soviet arms deal in 1955. Then, in the span of just months in 1956, the canal is nationalized, the secret invasion is launched by Israel, Britain, and France, and finally, immense international pressure forces a humiliating total withdrawal by early 1957. It really is a masterclass in how rapidly cause and effect can snowball from local politics into a full-blown global superpower crisis.
Which leaves us with this final, really provocative thought to ponder. Did the Suez Crisis officially mark the moment the Cold War superpowers permanently replaced the old European empires? When the dust finally settled on the canal, it was undeniably clear that the United States and the Soviet Union were now the ones calling the shots on the global stage. It's an absolutely incredible piece of history that shaped the modern world. I hope this explainer has helped you grasp the true gravity of these events, and I highly encourage you to keep exploring the fascinating turning points of our past